just sort of a let's say an introduction today. That this is I think an extraordinary thing that we're doing this panel online. We've got 6 speakers from sitting in 5 different cities right now: Bucharest, Warsaw, Prague, Vienna, and Budapest. And yeah, so yeah, definitely crazy days have been the last few weeks, and this whole new situation is not even close to be over yet. So this is supposed to be our plan is to this is our first part of our online event. We would like to do more, and we've got a lot of feedback from our community about what topics and what issues they're most interested in, and we would like to have a series of more focused online events with very specific topics in terms of sectors, issues, and of course locations as well. We have a huge interest for today. We have around 700 people registered from almost 40 countries, which is a lot. So okay, we've got 6 speakers as I mentioned. I'm not going to introduce them. You can all see their names on the screen. I'm talking to the audience now. If you can put the view on gallery view, I think it's easier to see all the speakers in the same time. So it can help a lot with visibility. And there's a chat in the Q&A, so you can just write in comments or questions that we can answer with the panel. All right. We discussed a couple of questions, but first I just wanted to start with sort of an icebreaker to asking you guys what is that you miss the most from, let's say, from the business as usual days we used to have a few weeks back.
What else could I say but my colleagues?
Yeah, really, it's social interaction with each other. Home office does many good things, but not all of them.
Meeting.
Meeting, okay.
I didn't miss MIPIM, but I'm starting to miss travel.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So the first question would be sort of, jumping into it is when do you expect things to get back to normal, or to when do you expect? Well, how do you expect this whole recession crisis thing playing out? Hannes?
Yeah, we still hope for in V-shape a bounce back, but there will definitely be a drop in between. So let's hope it's just like a quarter. If you look now to Asia, where most of the stuff is now over, they picked up their pace quite well and speedy enough. It might be that in like 4 to 6 weeks time, we are more geographically focused on what's going on in the United States or in the Americas. And then we see that the worst is over in Europe. Still, it will be lots of time to take the pieces up again. But at least for private consumption and the people who are now so coped in, they will be back on the streets as soon as there is a chance, with every precaution that they can take. But at least to get like a little bit of normality back, I think we see also an increase in private consumption consumers.
Right. Anyone else on how and when we get back to normal, or what is the new normal?
I think what for me is worrying, if I may say, is that what I think we all are missing is that from a policy viewpoint, it would be helpful if the authorities would communicate like a firm date. I think it would be something that companies, people could work towards. If we would say, for example, in a country that by mid-May, we reopen schools, we reopen businesses, restrictions will be, let's say, severely lessened, then companies can start working towards that date. Yeah? And also people will not be laid off because companies will say, okay, it's a few more weeks, I will retain people on my payroll. And I think if something like that would happen, ideally, of course, within an EU context or at least clustered context, I think the recovery could be much more swift. Yeah? Because I'm afraid we entered into this recession in a very patchwork way, country by country. It was like a domino effect that we saw. And I think if we exit the situation in a similar manner, I think the recovery will be very patchworked. And that will not be ideal, obviously, for definitely property markets.
Yeah, I mean, that's partially my concern too, is I think we're going to be held back to an extent by the lowest common denominator, meaning that for us to return to normal, it might be well and good if Czech and Poland or Hungary come back and everybody's back in work in a month and a half. But if the rest of Europe stays in this, we're not going to have a normal. So it's until there's really more freedom of movement and freedom of capital, that's going to be the larger challenges. Our markets are still very highly pegged towards other countries, if you look in terms of investment volumes, et cetera, et cetera. So until you see Germany and the rest of Europe kind of come back to normal, I think it'll be hard for us, even if we're ahead of the curve in terms of slowing this down, to see our business lives come back to normal.
I fully agree, Luke. I can only add that talking to my colleagues in Seoul, in Korea, I think Korea is actually the country which is managing the crisis in a probably one of the best ways. And they are actually back to the offices. The kids are in school, so for them it's like over, and they're asking questions. So can we come and see you in May? It would be cool. However, I hope for June, if not July. So this is this kind of mismatch here. That, as you said, Luke, we have a different phase of this crisis. So the Asian countries like Korea, Singapore, Japan, they are already out of that, and they would like to open the business and they can't. So we have to get to this point to this momentum when all of us will be back on the stage.
For me, the game changer will be Italy. Once you see the curve going down, you have enough data points and material for an European view on this crisis. And I think this will give hope to the other countries as well, when they are over the hump and when the numbers are going down. And from there on, you can pick on what happened in Asia, how long it took them to get back to normal once you have the turning point and see the trend changing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to bear in mind, though, that what's impacting us in all of our businesses at the moment is not actually the illness, which is terrible, but it's the responses to the illness or the preventive measures that have been put in place to slow the spread of the illness down to allow the health systems to cope. So what we're not seeing, certainly I think in Central Europe yet, huge numbers of people who are ill. What we're seeing is everything is shut down to prevent huge numbers of people becoming ill. And that's what's impacting our business. There's no travel, everything is closed, people are working from home. And so the two have to somehow come in parallel to match, let's say, the response to the threat in such a way that ultimately also the economies are able to function.
Right.
I largely agree with that. Just seeing from our end on the legal side as well, talking to investment bankers and the like, I think that the big question mark for everybody is, just to pick up on Noah's point, is that on the public health crisis, nobody knows where are we going with all of this. I mean, if it's a recession, it's an economic downturn, we've all been through that, we know how to plan for it, know what to do. But here, in most of our countries, we do not have the large scale testing like it's happening in other countries. We don't know how long this thing is going to last for, and that's basically the elephant in the room. We just don't know, and that's the worrying part, as I think everybody said.
Picking up on a previous point that the whole region seems very diverse right now in terms of government measures and how this might play out. Do you see this as a longer term threat that let's say the CEE region, which was functioning more or less as one market, at least for our purposes in the property industry, so that all these individual let's say events could sort of disrupt the cross-border nature of the CEE property business?
Definitely, when we see measures like the National Bank of Serbia has introduced, which are quite clear and prudent, but they only are for Serbian banks, so not for foreign lenders or for syndicates which are mixed of local and foreign lenders. So therefore you bring an uncertainty to the market, which is at the moment not the right thing to do.
All right, we've got one question. Just I think that might be actually the last one on, let's say, the politics of all this. But there's a question from the audience that what do you think about the I'm quoting, total lack of EU integrated approach and how this might affect our business?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the absence of a coherent policy and guidance from the EU, I think, is what will define the EU going forward. I think the EU is missing greatly the opportunity that was handed out, and sorry to call it an opportunity between brackets, that this crisis gave the EU to really show its usefulness in times of crisis, to assist other countries to make sure that policy is applied in a coherent way, which gives more certainty to businesses and to people. Yeah, I think the fact that the EU is missing that chance is very bad for the future of the European Union and the future of, let's say, common decision-making within the European Union. I think we see now some efforts from the EU to basically remedy or step into the growing North-South divide in Europe, because there's already talks about a Marshall Plan to assist Southern Europe, which of course is more hit, unfortunately, by this than the rest of Europe. But again, I think if the EU is not going to jump on any of those trains, it will be very bad for the future of Europe. That's my personal view on this.
Right. Gijs, actually, there is one specific question for you from the audience, from Brian Wilson. He says, Gijs, given the demonstrable changes over the past 3 weeks, how do you really expect any government to put a date on when we will be free of the restrictions?
I think it's a good question. Of course, it's very difficult to pinpoint a real date. So, of course, such an approach has to be based on data points. And I think the only reliable data points we have, reliable, of course, with a pinch of salt, are those from Asia. And I think South Korea was already mentioned by Adrian earlier. Of course, they had a different approach to this crisis, but you can see clearly also in China a certain curve, a timeline for this to happen. Yeah, and I think if you project that timeline, and ideally, of course, apply, as was mentioned also earlier, the Italian scenario to that, you can work towards a date. And of course, you have to take caution. You shouldn't put a date too early. But if you don't have a date, I think, yeah, the disadvantages of not having a date will potentially outweigh the problems of having a date. I think it was already said in some cases before, in certain ways, the cure can be worse than the disease. And I think if we fail to get out of this in a proper way, it could backfire to all of us. Yeah.
Right. It has been already brought up by the audience as well, and it's definitely an issue we need to touch upon is the rental and leasing aspects of all this situation, force majeure and all this. What's your overall experience so far? How does that work? What are the most crucial issues in that? Luke?
I think that one of the pieces that's important here, just to keep in mind, is that it's still, you know, the world has changed very, very quickly. And so we're still actually within one billing cycle of when these restrictions were imposed. So, right, rent was paid in March, and now we're coming up on April. And so I think it's really, you know, it's very, very early days to understand overall what the impact will be on the market. I think what we can see already is that it's not evenly spread. So there are obviously tenants who are very impacted, let's say retail tenants in shopping centers. But that even is uneven, because while some of our retail tenants may you know, even be closed or have a difficult situation, the supermarkets, the drogerie marks of the world are doing extremely well in these months. So I think that's very uneven. And other pieces, for instance, logistics are performing exceptionally well. Hotels are not. So I think it's very early days still to make broad generalizations about overall the impact on rent. Obviously, nothing like this has really ever happened before, right? We have more or less every sector in every country in the world impacted in some way. And it will take time, I think, for all of us to understand what in fact is going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say right now, people are focused on tenants, but it's also a tough time to be a landlord, because we've seen it in the go-between, where you've got tenants that are coming and asking for rent reductions or deferrals, even on the office side, 2 weeks ago. And you're saying, well, wait a second, if you couldn't make up as an office tenant 1 month of rent already, then maybe there was a problem with your business, or maybe you're taking advantage of the situation. Whereas conversely, there's other companies that genuinely need it. So what we're starting to see is that landlords are really having to treat this case by case, and look at the situation of the tenant, try and understand what the problem is, and then see if there's a solution. What we're mostly seeing talked about right now is potential deferrals of rent, with likely some kind of extension or makeup on the back end of the lease. That seems to be something that's starting to happen, and I think is probably a healthy compromise. But it really isn't, I don't think, going to be a blanket solution for this, because I think it was mentioned before, unfortunately, the governments haven't really stepped in our region to backstop the landlords, which makes it more difficult for them to kind of do blanket statements for all the tenants to help them out. So it will be a struggle. I think the sentiment is positive, which is encouraging. I think everybody realizes that there's a problem that everybody's facing, but there's no clear path right now.
I don't want to compare the two situations, but you know, between, let's say, the 20th of December and the 5th of January, as a rule, not a lot happens in any offices, for instance, anywhere in our markets. And that's the kind of time frame we're still looking at. How this goes forward and how long it goes forward, I think, is the next question. But I agree with you, Luke, about, you know, people were there on day one saying, oh, okay, here we are. We'd like to have a discussion with you. And as a landlord, you need to treat it on a case-by-case individual basis.
If I can add to that as well.
Basically mirrors the same as the landlord. So everybody's prepared to do good, but communication is key to get the interaction going on. Everybody is working with the data that they have day to day. We see hard effects in hotels. We see it then downwards the scale with retail schemes and logistics. But even if logistics, if there is light industrial included in it, there might be some tenants who have problems nowadays.
But there are also some who are growing, even in these weeks.
Sure. Basically, it's like what you have in your pot. And this is a strong key now with going to a relationship bank, talk through with them, see what the situation brings.
I think now it's a right point about the asset classes, yes. But on the other hand, what we are right now checking in our existing buildings is the profile of tenants. So of course we want to somehow anticipate any potential problems, and especially look into the areas which are mostly, or areas, not areas, but businesses which are mostly affected. Yes. So fortunately, we don't have any hotel operators in our buildings, any travel agents. So you know, in this way, we can see that our portfolio is quite safe and resilient. but definitely you have to address it not only for the asset but for the profile of your client. Yeah, so you can maybe help them in advance if you have anyone which is basically right now going under the water.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We've seen this because the BPO sector, SSE sector is so big across the region. And this has been the big question mark of what's going to happen to that sector, because there's the argument on one side of, will you see these companies pull out of the region as part of cost cuts? And how are the businesses reacting? And I think, again, we're seeing that some businesses, depending on what the services were, are having a difficult time. If you're related to the travel industry right now, unless you're the customer complaint section, you're probably not busy. If you're related to technology, though, purely, we're seeing actually a lot of tenants looking to even look at expanding their space. The other thing that we've already been hearing is that there's potential opportunities in Central Europe, as you've seen now. Working from home in India and in the Philippines doesn't work the same way as it does here. So some of these back office support systems that they had in India, which was, say, one of our competitors, it's not functioning, and we're seeing them coming back towards Central and Eastern Europe already, because we can actually work through this period working remotely, etc. And you can't do that in some of the less developed economies.
Right. Victor, any
I just wanted to get back to
on force majeure?
Force majeure and things like that. I mean, a big deal has been made about force majeure, that we're going to get this wave of people invoking it, and indeed a lot of people are, and the standard is basically the same across many of our jurisdictions. But, you know, I think as the point has been made, that there's going to be clear cases where some of these people obviously have a case. I mean, restaurants, hospitality, retail, shopping centers, okay, these guys are in trouble. Those discussions need to be had. But we are seeing a lot of the big players saying, well, what about us? Let's also then take advantage of the situation and also ask for these reductions. And this is where we're seeing a lot of pushback by landlords, and in some cases, understandably so, to take a case-by-case approach. And I think part of the question mark that a lot of landlords are also asking is that, you know, what is the approach of our financiers? What are the banks saying about all this? Because if we're giving discounts, we automatically have to notify our banks and have a discussion. And I'm not sure if maybe Mr. Wimmer has a viewpoint on that, and how I think that's a big question mark for most of these landlords.
The measures that are in place now by the governments are quite diverse across our region. So if you go, for instance, to Hungary, where there's like a full stop, which is basically overruling nearly everything and pushing everything back by like 12 months, be it capital, be it interest, be it fees. So there is an opt-out version for it. So we see lots of companies talking to the banks, opting out, at least for this quarter. As Noah said, basically the first quarter, the rental income is on the accounts. But going forward to Q3, Q2 and Q3, there might be some issues. So I guess most of the time we will see deferral of capital, but the interest will be paid to a certain extent. And this goes through various countries. If we see Croatia, which only did like a 90 days moratorium stop, and then everything is added on to the next quarter. Not sure if this can be upheld with the pace of the prices going on. So banks are here, they have an open ear, they want to get information from their borrowers, they are here to work it out. Everybody will do their scenarios and modeling. Everybody's prepared to do the work, but please pick up the phone, send an email and get in touch with them.
Right, we've got one comment in the in the chat bringing up some of those large retailers who stopped paying rent. At least in Germany, there's a huge scandal about this in the German press. Adidas, Puma, Deichmann, I think, have stopped paying rents. Do you know any retailers doing the same thing in CEE or in Austria?
I haven't seen anything up that yet, but basically they work with different timelines and time circles. So what I heard in the last days is that mid to end August is a very crucial date for retailers, because then they are ordering all the stuff for Christmas. So if you don't have a clear picture until August, maybe the highest and best turnover season of the year might fall into the water, because there is not enough goods to be then delivered in November and December if you don't order it back in August. And you have to pre-fund this as well.
Right.
At the same time, retailers, of course, are not selling their current collections. Yeah, basically, of course, sales of the spring-summer collection have also come to a virtual halt when it comes to fashion retailers. And I think what we see in Romania, at least, is that the vast majority of retailers is, of course, trying to not pay their rents at the moment in the current situation.
Right.
But sorry, just
sort of an. Go ahead, Luke. Go ahead.
The flip side is we had a call with our Chinese business last week, and one of the kind of takeaways that they said to us is, from the Chinese experience, everybody came back to work and stores started opening again mid-February, and they said the push towards retail purchases and shopping was so big that retailers were running out of stock. And the other issue is the retailers that had let their staff go, when they got the green light to reopen, weren't ready for it. So the companies that had stock on board and had their employees waiting to come back, they're expecting actually retail sales in China to dramatically beat forecast for the last month or so in February, which was an interesting point. And it's something I think for us, I don't know if it'll play out the same way, but it is something to keep in mind, that the Chinese experience, if you want to look, what could this look like? Businesses are working again, retailers are working again, people are in restaurants. Yes, their habits have changed. So they're not doing family seating, sitting around a table like they used to. They bring their own chopsticks and all these different things that they never did before. But they said life kind of went back to a new normal very, very quickly on all fronts, which I think was encouraging to hear.
Okay, that's definitely good news. We've got some comments in the chat saying that retailers do stop paying rents or send notices to landlords, and saying they're not willing to pay, at least in the short term, both for Austria and CEE. We've got these comments here. Well, we have a couple of polls to sort of engage the audience as well. So we're going to show you the first poll. It's kind of an obvious one. So I'd like to ask my colleague to put it on. So the first one is, has the COVID-19 outbreak negatively affected your operations? I expect not many people pushing no, but let's see. And the second is, when do you expect business to back to normal? Spring, summer, autumn 2021, or never? Let's see. Meanwhile, one of the I would say obvious questions is, which asset classes are more, or which are less resilient to this, let's say, current crisis, if we can call that. Do you have any views on that? Office, logistics, hotel was obviously mentioned. Any thoughts on that?
As I mentioned, our logistics portfolio, I think, has responded, or our logistics tenants have responded in a very positive way. Some of them actually are seeing their businesses grow in this period. Obviously, as people shift more and more to online purchasing, the demand for modern not only logistics but light industrial and industrial space as well as logistics space, I think is strong. So I think that's a trend we were seeing anyway, and it's a trend that has strengthened now.
Yeah, and probably we also are expecting changes in the supply chains. Yeah, probably companies will maintain larger stocks, perhaps, out of the Corona crisis experiences. Supply chains, maybe more nearshoring, less dependency on the Far East. So all of this combined could be positive for the logistics industrial asset class. It's probably the sector that is most benefiting, between brackets, from the current situation.
Yeah, I think logistics is a safe bet, as you know, and Gijs, you said. On the other hand, when you look into the I would say alternative investments, when you look into the bonds, when you look into the, for example, the 10-year German bond, the spread between yields of properties and this, I would say, the safe haven of government bonds is actually expanding right now. So looking at the office market, I would say that with all of this volatility, if you can have a stable cash flow of 5, even, if we have some properties with 10-year leases, for example, in Bucharest, which are rented to AAA tenants from IT or still strong banking strong banking representatives from different countries. So I would say that then you can have a very good alternative to your income, because right now it's hard to put the money elsewhere if you have a chance, of course, because the stock market is going crazy. So as a matter of fact, I would say that at some point, of course, right now it's actually impossible to travel and to see the asset. But when the whole shift of this virus will go into the, I would say, safer waters, then, as you just mentioned, look on the Chinese retail, it can be a bit of a run on also on some of the best located office assets, which are leased to this, AAA tenants in the, I would say, capital cities or strong regional cities of Poland.
Right. We see some. I see some comments in the chat. Actually, from all of the countries, saying that retailers did stop paying rent. Even large retailers like Erste, a few other names have been mentioned as well from the Czech, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland as well. So. Meanwhile, we got the results for the poll. 92% of the people said that they have been negatively affected by the COVID situation, and well, most people are expecting things to get back to normal. Let's say summer, autumn, or next year. So these are the three options that most people voted for. Autumn being the most popular. But still, people are quite optimistic in a sense that 30-something% are saying that things will get back to normal by either spring or summer, which is this is quite good. One thing I think that we talked about earlier is at least half of you right now are working or from home or been joining the discussion from home, myself included. That's all nice. I think working from home can work to a certain extent, but how about investment deals? Is it at all possible to make or close investment deals, let's say from home or without traveling at least?
I think what you can do is closing a transaction. I think that can be done. The question is more whether you can do a deal from A to Z without traveling. I think travel is important, as few investors have ever bought a property without having performed a site visit. And of course, modern technology, Google Street View, Google Maps, virtual tours, which we're now doing also for certain mandates, they come very close, but not really close enough to the real thing. I think what people like about real estate is that it's an asset class that basically is tangible. Yeah? Buildings are tangible. And if you cannot travel to buildings, that tangibility is basically diluted. And I think also it depends on which countries you're talking about. If we look at the more peripheral markets like Romania, traveling is probably even more important because most investors in this region know almost every building in Warsaw, Prague, or Budapest. They have been there regularly. They know the various submarkets. They know basically when a building is offered, which is the building, where it's located roughly. They have a feeling with respect to submarket. If you speak about markets like Romania and other more peripheral markets, visits are more important because people don't have that close feeling of the market. They need to visit, and often they don't only visit a building, they also want to get familiar with the whole market. They want to meet people, they want to meet bankers, they want to meet agents, they want to meet other participants in the market environment, advisors, lawyers. And for that, you need traveling, I would say, especially when you're entering new markets.
I agree with Gijs. I mean, generally speaking, transactions that are at the start of a process and those are going to be much more difficult to close because you do need that travel element. But ones that are very sufficiently advanced, that you're already 90% there, and it's just basically a question of the lawyers and others just finalizing documents. Of course, you're running into logistical problems now. Who gets power of attorney? Is there a notary open to this? Can you get pieces of paper? We're running into those issues. I got myself a bunch of POAs from clients to sign this and that. But I think if the deals are sufficiently advanced, yes, there's still a drive to try to close them in some circumstances. The ones that are early stages, I think you're seeing definitely a slowdown.
But again, I would come back a little bit to the fact that we've been in this for 3 weeks, right? So deals that were in the pipeline, I agree, hopefully can close. And my understanding anecdotally is that there are transactions that are closing. And I would come back to what Adrian said a few minutes ago. I think we haven't begun to see yet. I mean, the U.S. Government has announced a $2 trillion package, which will make its way into the economy. The European Central Bank and these countries also in the coming weeks are going to announce stimulus packages that are going to create liquidity overall in the markets. And then what you'll have is the difference between the spread of negative interest rates or whatever they'll be with a lot of liquidity coming into the market from somewhere, vis-a-vis what are stable assets that are, leased on a long-term basis to good tenants. So I think it's very early to draw conclusions about how all of this will play out. Right now, I think that's correct. That there will not be, new transactions from A to Z, or it's very difficult without a site visit. But I think, if we're still in a no travel regime in 6 months, then the world is really going to look very different. If we are in a situation where that is beginning, to ease, as one would expect that it will, then I think there's a very, good logic to say, okay, this will continue to be, as Adrian said, an asset class overall in an investment portfolio, and by that I mean real estate, that makes a lot of sense for people to hold. And so you will see transactions.
And Gijs, I agree with you about the fact that right now it's the biggest challenge is to bring people in. So we have managed successfully to sign some transactions even 2 weeks ago, but to start any new marketing process, yes, it's impossible. So I'm actually involved in one project in US with my colleagues from Skanska. And they are quite advanced, maybe even more than they're. I mean, the guys that we're working with are quite advanced in terms of developing all of these technological tools, VR, Googles, everything that can help to bring people into the building and show it to them from their headquarters or from the places they sit, without physically taking them on the project. So. Of course, this is just again some kind of situation where we can let's say plan that maybe in maybe around summer, there'll be some activities, so we can do this virtual tours, for example, in May, June, to prepare people for the real visit. But without the physical visit, it's simply impossible to buy. There were sometimes guys, I still remember 15 years ago, some guys from Europe were buying properties in Poland, for example, from the map. But they have learned a tough lesson, so nothing like that will ever happen. And to add something to this time scale, what I kind of sense is that probably guys will not have like a regular summer. I think the summer months of July, August will turn into a regular working days. So basically, the activities which I hope will start to run somewhere in June will be really activated to a bigger extent over the summer. So I think it will be a busy summer, in terms of some meetings and activities. I hope.
Right. We have a few questions, and they're quite popular about developments and ongoing constructions, and how the whole lockdown affects these developments and constructions. Adrian or Noah, you guys are both developing as well. Any comments on that?
Our construction sites continue to work, both in Poland and in Hungary. So we're not in a full lockdown situation yet, and construction work is ongoing.
We have around 80-85% of people on our sites. So all of the construction sites are going. All of the projects are going ahead so far. We of course take all of the possible measures to protect people, because it's very, I would say, critical right now to take all of the hygienic norms, and also provide for all of the potential measures, even like taking the temperature of our workers at the beginning of the day, to see if there is no danger of someone being sick to affect the others. And why we are protecting, of course, people and their well-being. We have to also think about the overall Skanska business. So we are, by keeping the construction going, we're keeping the business and we're keeping the job. So this is somehow our philosophy for these days.
I mean, one thing we've heard is that construction is going on across the region. Sure, there's pockets of labor shortages because you've seen, say, Ukrainian construction workers go back to the Ukraine. Some construction workers just simply have withdrawn for health reasons or precautionary measures. So it's progressing probably a little bit slower than it would have a few months ago, but I think it's very positive that this is continuing across the region, because I think, like Adrian said, if construction stops, we're just doubling down on the lack of activity when we come out of this.
I can speak for Serbia, Belgrade, where we are covering a couple of developments, including one construction site with 1,500 workers on site. So there, the biggest issues is getting them safely to the site and back again, with being prudent enough that nobody can infect anybody else. And the other big issue is that the construction material that is not inland, which is stacked at the border, to get that on site in a timely manner. But overall, it's still progressing.
Right, but is there any chance to start new developments, new constructions, in the coming weeks? This is a question also asked by the audience.
I think we are right now about to launch one project in Warsaw. So I am not so much involved in the early stages of our construction or development of office buildings. But what I have recently heard, I think we are about to start project in Warsaw soon. So nothing so much is changing, to be honest. You know, again, people maybe at the beginning, they have somehow been, of course, you know, concerned about, you know, the conditions and their health. But right now, I think many people are thinking about their jobs. So, you know, if you can have a job, and, you know, this is, again, a huge shift from, let's say, a couple months ago, where you were begging, you know, all of the workers on the site, begging, of course, you know, I'm exaggerating, but you know, trying to keep them on the site, and there were like buses coming and taking them to another site. So right now they had to change a bit, you know, their attitude, because now it's about really like protecting the job and getting, you know, the salary. So I think this is also one of the changes coming out from this crisis.
We mentioned working from home already. You know, most employers are allowing or even sending their workers to work from home. Many of you are working from home. Do you think that this you know, experience of people, let's say, successfully working from home will have a longer term impact on office demands or the way we work, on workplace strategies? I mean, even law firms are working from home. If I don't know, Victor, if you can confirm that, which used to be basically a mission impossible, you know, back in the days.
I agree, and I mean, we're already seeing some office tenants, you know, asking those same questions. I mean, this basically is a test run for them. Do I really need all of that space? And I think in some degree, a lot of the shared service centers and the others who are a large portion of them are already working from home. You know, there's not going to be too much of a change there, but other offices, other operators, they're asking those questions, and now they're really thinking in the future, do I really need all of that space? So I think the answer is yes.
And no, also, I think on the other side, I think a lot of people, much as they all love their families, are looking forward to getting back into the work environment. And I just think that, you know, there are things you can do from home, and there are times when maybe a half day or one day already our office tenants have more employees than they have workstations in their large headquarters developments. That said, I don't think we're going to see this shift as a paradigm shift on a semi-permanent basis where people just work from home instead of being in the workplace, because I think the impact both on the way the company interacts and also on the way people are able to structure their day is just very different. I mean, I think all of us are probably encountering what it's like when you have your kids home and you're also trying to get through the workday at the same time, and that's a challenge for lots of people.
And I think you have to also differentiate the position or the specific jobs you have. I'm usually spending maybe 1 or maximum 2 days per week in the office. So, you know, there's not so much of a change for me why I'm right now spending, you know, all of my days out of office. So it's about the job you have, and it's also about the generation you are, you know. I know from some of my younger colleagues that they are really, like, you know, so anxious to come back to the office and you know, feel the atmosphere and, you know, the vibe of being close to their peers. So, you know, this is something which you have to somehow also differentiate, and maybe it will have some impact, but, you know, then I would say it will be still like some kind of a combination. And here, you know, one of the things which can play quite of interesting role will be this, you know, co-working business. So this can also put it, you know, change a bit the arrangement of our, I would say, working life. Yes. So I don't think, you know, people start to work from homes or from their flats, but I think it will be more about a bit of more flexible arrangement of, let's say, leases, workplaces, and, you know, the way you interact. But still, I'm 100% sure that people want to be, you know, together and somehow, you know, exchange the ideas and find solutions on problems.
Is the current situation good or bad for co-working operators?
Right now, I think it's a huge hit for all of the co-working business. You can see we were going like Lehman under the water. But I think this is short term in my opinion. Long term, guys like those who survive, especially IWG, or we have also our own business, which is co-working space operator Business Link. I think long term this will be a winning business.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are going to be some questions to answer, though. I mean, are people really going to want to rush back into office space they've got to share with 150 strangers, at least on the short term? So there's going to be some technical issues that this sector has to work out. I would suspect that you'll see a consolidation, or just simply some of the smaller independent players maybe not surviving this. I do think longer term, yeah, there's definitely a role, and as people have adopted to technology, it becomes probably even easier to step into a co-working environment. But I do think that it's going to emerge from this pretty different than it did going in.
But look, I think it will come not from the workers, but from the tenants, from the corporates, because it's inevitable that the tenants will be quite, I would say, risk averse to sign or to go into the long-term commitments. Yeah, so therefore I say that this co-working space will have a big impact on the future, because if I am as a tenant willing to have 2,000 square meters in a building, I would rather have like maybe 1,500 for 5 years, or maybe even better to have it for 3 years, which I hope will not come. But there are some voices about really shortening the leases. So then definitely I want to have some kind of flexibility on my lease, and that's why I think co-working will be this function that I can still have short-term part of my premises that I can give away if there are some issues on the horizon.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think though, if companies are going to start using this more as a hedge against a financial commitment, then you're probably going to expect to see that the co-working groups are going to increase pricing. I would have to guess, just to make up for the fact that they're now carrying the risk of having to sign a long-term lease. Therefore, there's got to be an incentive for them, because they're realizing their business model is probably more fragile than they expected 6 months ago. So I agree with you, but I think that it is going to be different. They're probably going to look at how they're going to have to increase pricing to adapt for if and when something like this happens again. And if companies flood in just to not sign long leases, they're the ones going to be on the hook.
We've got a couple of questions from the audience. Actually, they are demanding to comment on Resi, on the impacts on the residential developments and sales and so on. Anyone?
I don't know. Would you now contemplate buying a home?
But how exactly would you buy a home, right?
That's the thing. So first the job situation must be stable again, and then we will see what happens to the prices that are now currently on the market, and then we can think about new developments.
I think for me it would be interesting to look at what happened in China. I think Luke already mentioned that earlier. And we can learn a lot from how other countries, and especially the real estate sector in those countries, has reacted. And using that to project how the residential market here will recover. Because of course, if this lasts short term, currently nothing is probably going to happen because people are not renting out apartments. Yeah, we have, for example, in the city of Prague, a lot of R&B apartments that weren't short-term rental that are obviously completely empty because there's no tourists. All of that stock is now hitting the market, where anyhow, very few people are active in the current period because it's a frozen period, I would say. If this situation lasts longer, probably the rental market will be benefiting from a recession, as it typically does, because people are deferring the purchase of a home. And then the home ownership market will be hit by the current situation. But again, it would be interesting to see how this happened in China. And moreover, I'm always wondering myself, and I haven't gotten an answer to that, how has China dealt with consumer confidence? Yeah? Have people been cut in terms of paycheck? Yeah? Has confidence been hit during the situation in a long-term way? If it's a 2-month situation, as it was in China, January, Wuhan went on lockdown. Now, end of March, Wuhan is slowly emerging out of the lockdown. If people were kept on their payroll and got their money, probably the impact on confidence, of course, once the first shock was over, was limited. But if people got their salaries cut and many people were made redundant, I think then, of course, the restart of those markets, especially also the residential market, will be deferred in time. So it'll be interesting to look at lessons learned in other jurisdictions in that context.
I think we can also draw a parallel or a difference between 2008 and now. I mean, 2008, you had all of these residential projects that were way over leveraged. The banks were there. And I think what we're seeing now in a lot of there's definitely going to be a pressure. There's going to be fewer sales and all of that. But if anyone's expecting all of these fire sales happening now, and all these projects being put into insolvency and the like, I don't think that's happening, just because a lot of these projects nowadays seem to have much stronger equity positions. You have these strange barter arrangements where basically people put the land, they get X number of apartments, joint ventures, and things like this. Absent a very clear bank pressure, I don't really necessarily see a fire sale happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I fully agree, Victor. I just wanted to say exactly the same thing. People have been buying so far with equity. So I'm not an expert from Resi market, but what I have heard was like 50% was bought of apartments, at least in Poland. 50% of the stock has been bought with equity, so no debt. So therefore, as you Victor said, I can't see any fire sales. And again, depending on the development of the market highs, some people can think about again, saving this little, yield on Resi, which they can get, of even 4%. And if you think, okay, if I can get 4% from this apartment, should I decide to go into something else and risk on again putting my money into some stocks or some bonds which will be yielding 0.5. So maybe again people will be starting to think, okay, maybe I bought an apartment and then try to find a tenant, because of the fact that there is now not so much of construction going.
I think also, though, I would touch on something that you said and Victor said as well. Overall, as a sector in the region, I think 2008 was not so long ago, and a lot of us remember it. And I think as a sector, we're just much better positioned now than we were 12 years ago, because people have been much more prudent. We're not over leveraged. I think, again, I'm not speaking about even Wing specifically or Echo specifically, but overall in the real estate sector in CEE, the vast bulk of the companies who are here lived through that period. The ones who are here survived that period, and they did it by being prudent. They did it by being good partners for their tenants and for their banks. And the result of that is that we enter this phase, I think, in a better position than we did that crisis. And so there's more depth and there's more resilience in the market, and that should carry us through. Again, we're 3 weeks into this, so I think it's early to be drawing overall conclusions, but what we can see is that people are not, I think on the first day, it didn't take people a long time to understand, okay, we've shifted, let's say our functioning mode a little bit, and it's time to move into something that we already have some sense of what to do. And hopefully there are balance sheets on the one side and cooperative relationships between banks, tenants, and property companies on the other, which allow us to manage through this period in a reasonably healthy way.
A question for you, Victor. Someone is asking, is there going to be a pandemic clause in the rental agreements?
We're starting to see that type of question being asked in various clauses, various contracts. How do we deal with it? Pandemic, not necessarily dealing with pandemic as in the health crisis, but also people are asking, do you have a lot of Chinese suppliers? Do you have a lot of your products coming from these other markets that are more effective than others? At the moment, I haven't seen any specific clauses inserted, but there's a pressure, and definitely other sides are taking advantage of it.
It's definitely becoming the norm on valuations, for sure. I think RICS has even issued guidance for all valuations during this period to have additional language kind of covering off the uncertainty. I mean, how are you going to value a building? I mean, this brings us on to the point that maybe it's on purpose, but no touch is pricing and what's going to happen to real estate pricing on the back end of this. Happy if anybody else wants to take first on that, but
in terms of pricing, I think actually this is a huge opportunity, this crisis. It was already said by Noah as well. We are very short into this, but some of the consequences will take long. And one of those is, of course, the massive government support programs, which are financed, and obviously they will result in lower interest rates in the foreseeable future. And I think the low interest environment that we anyhow were seeing, and which was a major push for real estate prices, is likely to continue even longer. On the back of that, Adrian mentioned it as well, and I fully agree with that, that real estate as an asset class will remain very popular and maybe even becomes more popular after this has settled.
Right. Another positive thing might be is that technology and digitalization sort of in the property business. Do you see that happening, or do you see that prop tech might be sort of a winner of this current situation?
I think short term people are going to be more focused on getting their own houses in order before they start jumping into large kind of prop tech initiatives. Longer term or midterm, though, I think yeah, it'll accelerate because people are realizing the benefits of it. I'm curious to see what will happen on the private equity side, whether or not you're still going to see this push of private equity into prop tech and similar kind of more adventuresome investments, or whether the big private equity firms are going to now shift back towards things like real estate, which are real assets that they can touch and feel. So it's a bit of a broader question in terms of, I think, the backing in the venture capital world and what's going to happen there.
All right. We've got one more poll for the audience and for the panel as well, and we also got a couple of questions from the audience. But if you guys can raise your hands, I mean, I'm talking to the audience. There's like there's a feature that you can raise your hand, and we can you can turn on your mic as well, and then you can ask questions directly from our panelists. All right, let's see. Meanwhile, a couple of questions. Do you think there could be anything positive that could come out of this current crisis? I'm sorry, we've got one. We've got someone from the audience who will join us for a question. So we'll just unmute him.
Well, actually, you were just reading out the question, so go. You just read it out now.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. It's your question.
That was the question. You just read it actually, so it was quite ironic. So go ahead. You read it out, so it's clearer. I think maybe better sound quality than my Scottish accent.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, and I like your Scottish accent.
Yeah, Adrian, are you growing a moustache?
Yeah.
Bloody hell! It's not. It's the wrong month. It's in November you do that, you idiot.
That's the last November, not this, you know.
I could grow that in a day.
Okay.
So Omar's question was, do you think there could be anything positive that could come out of this current crisis in terms of process or behaviors around real estate?
I think the closing process and paperwork process could get improved, because I think you're seeing governments having to maybe deal with things in a different way and using digital signatures and stepping away from this old Central European kind of setup and bureaucratic setup. So maybe that will improve, that we could see the processes simplifying.
Anyone else?
Some people are
Nothing
asking
come out of
on the
it.
human capital side, I mean, basically, is there going to be an adjustment? I mean, all of our jurisdictions have been suffering from severe labor shortages across the board, whatever you're doing. And people are asking, is this now going to help reset in terms of expectations, in terms of salaries or whatever? You're seeing all of these people in our citizens in our jurisdictions with repatriation efforts being sent back to their countries. Is that going to ease the pressure on construction? Is that going to ease the pressure on other consulting areas and things like this? That's one possible area people are asking questions about, but otherwise, I think it's just basically a wait and see.
I think, you know, Omar, what Gijs mentioned before, this word, which is nearshoring. So again, I don't want to be over positive, but because of, you know, Central Europe and our countries, I kind of believe that because of this, you know, the global chains, which are a bit distorted right now, all of different businesses, companies, industries will be trying to have this nearshoring of their supplies, of their functions. So talking about also this, you know, the business service sector and, you know, again, you know, the logistic and everything. I believe that this crisis can have a positive impact on, you know, Poland, Romania, Czech, Hungary, Slovakia, because, you know, the clients in the Western Europe would like to have a very quick, I would say, response and not distorted or disconnected supply of duties or services to their, let's say, headquarters. So I kind of believe it can impact our region positively. All
right. Well, I would like to sort of summarize and wrap it up. I would like to thank to all of you here, panelists, for the great discussion and for the audience, their attention as well. We had around 500 people listening to us for almost an hour. I think this is really great, coming from almost 40 countries. So there's a huge interest, I think, to sort of for the real estate community to stick together to see what others are getting out of this this mess we're living right now. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is the first part of a series of online events we're launching with really specific topics, and we will keep you posted about this and send you more information, and then hopefully we will see each other soon in person as well, because, you know, this is fun, but of course it would be nice to see all these faces in reality. So again, thanks a lot for everyone, for the audience and the panelists as well, and hope to see everyone really soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting, Csanád.